We're back. The first podcast I ever recorded was in 2021, and I interviewed my 3 kids on COVID. And that podcast name was Let's Get Real, y'all. We are going to get real today. I promise you that. However, due to a lot of reflection, my initials are MLP, and we are debuting today, first episode, baby, My Life's Purpose Coaching. And so super excited to have managing broker in the house, Doug Fredbeck with Keller Williams. Whoop, whoop. Doug runs the compliance and the broker position of a franchise that's near and dear to my heart. And we've got 270 agents. We're ranked right now 25 in international franchises. The Keller Williams franchises, there's about 840 of them. So you're killing it, and you're answering a lot of questions around this time. So if you find joy and tools and skills today, that's our goal. That's the positive impact that we're planning on doing today. First of all, I want to talk about mindset. Mindset's incredibly important to you. Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay, yes and yes, right? You're a big, bold advocate. And I first want to talk about a book I read during COVID that was called Loving What Is by Byron Katie. And she talks about a concept about fighting reality. And when you fight reality, you lose only 100% of the time, right? So, we have some new dynamics right now in the real estate industry. And I think the sooner that we get to a place in our heads that we're accepting the reality, and we can even say that out loud, right? Anytime we verbalize anything, it makes it more real. So that's one concept, like start accepting reality. The second concept is something called first thought, second thought. And you want to explain that concept a little bit?
Yeah, so like everybody, we have an initial reaction. We have a first thought when we're presented with a problem, with a decision, with an emotion. And so I think the ability to acknowledge the first thought, the first thing that comes to your head, and then be able to pivot and think about how you can have a second thought is really just a powerful tool that you can use when you're in an unsettling situation, or you're going to have that natural reaction, and then the ability to then move past that with a second thought is just a super powerful tactic.
Yeah, and that applies to anything, any of our thinking. So give us an example of maybe something that you've heard in the industry from someone. What would be their first thought, if you could articulate that?
A first thought might be, in kind of what our hot topics in the industry right now would be, is a seller going to pay a cooperating compensation?
Okay. And so that would be the first thought, right? And a lot of times I would say our first thoughts can be based on fear.
Yeah, fear-based.
Right? Yeah, fear-based.
Scarcity mindset.
Yep. And then the second thought is coming from your subconscious brain to your cognitive brain. And there is a pause there, right? And the pause is like acknowledging my first thought is this. That thought doesn't serve me well. So what would be a new thought? Right. So in that example, what would be a new thought?
Smart sellers understand the concept of cooperating compensation, and I trust that the market will realize that and be paid out accordingly. And if not, then you have some other options. We can go over what that might be.
Okay, very good. And then the third kind of concept that I want to share with everybody is something called stories, right? Very similar to thoughts, except stories typically, for me, I call it someone spinning. So it's not just a single thought like, oh, shoot, traffic's bad, I'm going to be late. Second thought is, oh my gosh, I hope they're okay. I'll get there when I'm supposed to get there. I'm grateful that I'm not in an accident today. Right? So those are shorter thinking, shorter thoughts examples. The story thoughts are when we go into like spiral mode. So you take a negative thought and you attach way fear, like the sky is falling. Oh my gosh, my compensation is being adjusted. Oh, do I need to sell my house? Right? Like everything extreme, right? And a lot of that is, again, fear-based. And so we have to spend more cognitive energy on creating a new story. So a lot of times I'll say with agents, okay, the story you're making up is what? And they'll make it up if they're going to be honest and vulnerable about it, right? And then I'll say, what's the news story?
Yeah, fear or faith, you choose.
Yes. And the news story takes energy and it takes time, and yet you can choose over and over and over for your brain to play the first story or your news story. And you can say to even yourself, I choose the news story that I'm going to tell myself is I'm going to become a better agent. I'm going to double my business. I'm going to protect my commissions, right? I'm going to build new skills and more confidence, and I'm going to grow as a business owner. I'm going to grow as a team owner, right? So I just want to kind of lay the foundation first, which is the mindset, right? All success in life and in wealth and in health is your mindset. And so now we'll get into the nitty-gritty of things, and yet just always go back to mindset, right? And, what's the story you're making up? What's the news story you're going to choose to believe? All right. Any other comments on that piece of things?
I would just say having that clear vision and clarity's power is so key to overcoming maybe what that story might be. And so if you can ask great questions and get clarity on what you're facing and what stories you might be telling yourself, that's another tool in the toolbox to then move you past where you are right now if you can start to see the future and where you want to be.
Yeah, that's great. And, as you're thinking that, like, how much programming do we have around contracts, right? And these certain contracts and not this one yet, right? And so it's like choosing to believe that a buyer agency agreement, the contract between the buyer agent and the buyer, is actually a great thing. And it's clarity is kind. Brene Brown taught me, clarity is kind. Like, it's not just power, it's also kindness so that everybody's on the same page. So yeah, it's really, really helpful. All right, let's do it. So Doug, mid-April 2024, give us an update, industry update.
Yeah, so here in the state of Indiana, the legislation passed a new law that is requiring a written buyer agency contract that'll go into effect in July. And really what the intent of that is to bring that transparency and understanding to all parties involved in the transaction. Nothing materially has changed. The buyer has always been responsible for that buyer agent commission. We just didn't do a good job of explaining that and using the tools that we had available to us. And so now we're going to have some more reform in the industry. And I do think that it's a net positive to just help set expectations between all parties, whether that's a buyer or a seller, and then the agent associated with each side of that.
Okay, so you mentioned something that is clear to me, and yet if someone outside of our industry, or maybe they're even newer in the industry, may not understand the breakdown of the buyer has always been responsible for it. So kind of walk us through that equation.
Yeah, so the fact that the buyer has always paid the buyer's agent commission is true. It might change on how they do that. So traditionally, the seller is going to offer cooperating compensation. That is negotiated between the seller and the list agent and says, hey, the total commission is X. We're going to choose to pay out a cooperating compensation. And so that was readily advertised and known going in to showing a house or writing an offer. And with that, it all comes back to the net offer to the seller. So if the buyer is not having to bring any cash to close to honor their financial obligation to the buyer's agent because the seller was offering that cooperating commission, then they wouldn't have that additional line item on their settlement statement. And so now the Department of Justice point of emphasis is that the buyer and the buyer agent are to agree on a commission up front before they start the home buying process, with the understanding that the buyer agent will still do their best and their fiduciary duty to shift that over to the seller as part of the overall negotiations in the purchase agreement.
Yeah, and that's clearly stated, which we can reiterate. I do want to give Summit Title a shout out. They've got a great seller's net proceeds that you can actually save different scenarios. If you don't have a tool, 100% download that. That's something you use.
Absolutely, yeah. So the seller net sheet, I would say, is a super helpful visual for any homeowner to see the breakdown of the investment that you're making when you take your property to market. If your goal is to get the highest price in the least amount of time, the statistics show that listing that is going to yield those results. And we also have a buyer net sheet, which we can dust off and start to give some more clarity to the buy side, which the lending industry has done a good job of incorporating that. They had some more industry guidelines where disclosing was an important part of that process up front. And if they do it incorrectly, then they can get burned. So I know for...
good faith estimates is what they used to call
it.
Yeah,
yeah, something like that. But I know that my preferred local trusted lender does a great job of consulting with that borrower up front, going over the numbers, not only issuing a pre-approval letter, but also that buyer breakdown of, hey, here's what it's going to look like at this price point for your cash to close.
Awesome. Yes, we will add those tools to the podcast, and then everywhere else this is going to go. Awesome. All right, so let's move into general public. Like when my sister in Lexington is calling me and she's like, what's going on in the industry, right? What do you say?
Yeah, so obviously there are a lot of questions from the general public. There's a lot of splashy headlines that I think are, clickbait, just like a lot of what we see in our media today. And I would say this, I've been a licensed agent since 2009. And before me, apparently there was a book that had all the listings, and you had to go look in the book and flip through it to see, the available inventory. And then with the evolution of the internet, there was some scarcity mindset from agents that, our job would go away. And yet we're stronger than ever as far as, how the internet has helped our businesses. So I don't think that materially there are seismic shifts in how we do business. I think this is just the next evolution of how we conduct ourselves. And in the absence of value, price becomes an issue. And if you're an agent who can communicate that value to your client, then you're in the right spot. And if you're struggling with that, then that's your opportunity to kind of double down and reevaluate and say, why do I do what I do? Why is this important to me? And so when I'm talking to the general public, I'm really just kind of reflecting on how I choose to do my business and why I'm doing it, and less about, kind of the shiny object right now.
Well, I just want to pause there for a minute because, again, back to like subconscious brain and cognitive brain, when we're having conversations with people, we're having to be cognitive in our thinking of ourselves, right? And so I think so often I hear agents talk about, and we do it with listings all the time, right? 100%. But it's this moment of like actualizing, and our time is valuable. That is the biggest asset that a human we have is our time and our energy. And so understanding your self-worth and how valuable your time is and your energy and your expertise. We've got great tools that articulate that. And yet I think it's a pause at a moment saying, hey, wait a minute.
You're worth it.
I'm worth it, right? And I pay all these other professional services. I pay my CPA. I pay my attorneys. Like, I pay these people because they're professionals, and yet I'm a professional. Ding, 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 ding. Right? And so I like that a lot. Good. All right. Let's talk about sellers. So how's that conversation different now? And then specifically, I would love for you to articulate what you're putting in verbiage-wise, if there's anything that's changed.
Okay, yeah. So on the seller side, number one, commissions have always been negotiable.
Always.
Always.
Let that sink in. Commissions have always been negotiable.
Yep.
There's nothing set by law. It's always been negotiable.
Yep. So that's the first thing. The second thing is in the listing contract that we use on a daily basis, there is clearly stated what the total commission is and then what that cooperating compensation is as well. And so there's a great script from Michael J. Mayer, who's the author of 7 Levels of Communication. And essentially, I'll summarize it like this. He says something to the effect of, what if we charged buyers, how much would you want to charge buyers to see your house? And then the seller goes, well, I don't want to charge them anything because I want the most people to come see my house at no cost, which we would agree is a good concept. And then it pivots to, well, what if we said that we would pay anyone, but only have to pay the one person who actually buys your house? Does that sound like a good idea?
Yes.
So we're offering to pay anyone, but we only have to pay the one person who pays you. So in our market, I know I'm going to be advocating to my sellers to say, hey, if you want to net the most amount of money, we need to be offering a competitive, cooperating compensation to that professional buyer's agent who's bringing us a qualified buyer. If your goal is to pay less commissions, we can do that and then potentially net less at the end. What would you like to do?
Yeah, that's huge. Let's back up just a little bit. When you're talking about, giving them choices and being very, very clear on what your value is, you have a phenomenal example. Can you share about your current, that recent listing and kind of what the results were and like how you position that? Mm-hmm. And I apologize too, like just from a vision standpoint, where are you when you are having these conversations?
Yeah, so kitchen table, downsizing couple, local attorney referral, and they initially had got an off-market offer for $167, and the local attorney who was working actively with them on their downsizing plan to the retirement community said, hey, seems a little low. Why don't you talk to a real estate professional, get some good comps, some accurate information. So I ran the numbers for him and I said, hey, 167, definitely too low. Here's an alternative plan, which would be take it to market. And we did. And I would say the average agent would have listed this property at $215,000. And yet, with my strategy that I laid out clearly at the initial listing presentation consultation was, let's go a little bit low. Let's start at 200. That's a nice round number. When you build your internet searches for your buyer clients, you're usually hitting kind of those bigger numbers. So I had a buyer consultation today, and they're going to look from 400 to 600. And so that's why I like to go to that round number, because I'm going to get both sides of the 200. And so by making sure that we get everybody who is interested at that price point, we were able to produce 43 showings, 12 offers, and ultimately the goal is to have one offer distance themselves from the pack, because we can only sell the house to one person. So the way that we do that then is in real time, we amend the listing contract and I changed the price from 200 to 225 to reset expectations with the buyers in the market so they know how the market is reacting and what it's going to take to become the winner. And so from those 12 offers, we had 2 that came up and wrote an offer at $230,000. After we gave them the information and I explained why I was doing it, because in fairness to the other parties and even people who aren't in this exact transaction, by making that adjustment in real time, appraisers, other sellers, other agents who are looking in that neighborhood deserve to know what that true number is versus what my 200 would have been if they had to wait 45 days until closing to see what it actually went under contract and ended up closing for.
Yeah, it's a benefit for everyone, and you're taking that extra step.
Yeah.
Too. Not just for clarity for the highest offer, but for all parties involved.
And that's also a way to indicate how it's trending and where you're headed without saying the number that you may have in hand or you may not. So it's giving them an indication and, like I said, resetting expectations. So ultimately, with that strategy that I explained up front to the sellers on how we're going to do it and why, we were not only able to get that very attractive price, but also the buyer chose to waive inspection. The buyer chose to include a term of $27,000 in low appraisal gap coverage. So if the appraised value and the purchase price don't match up, they volunteered in the beginning to help close that gap and make the seller whole at the agreed upon purchase price up front. So a lot of times I think it's we forget that not only do you want to get that best price, but you also want to get those terms. So we're closing on the day that they want, and they are super happy with the result. Like, they have been very complimentary. They are just really thrilled with how the process has gone because we have one and we follow the order of operations, and then we do what we say we're going to do.
So, of course, the coach in me is like, what are we doing? We're always getting a listing from a listing, right? And this is such a great example of how to communicate to other people that there's other people who want to live on the street or the neighborhood or that specific area. Are you guys going to do some sort of message, golden letter kind of thing?
Yeah, so if we had 43 showings, that means there's 42 other buyers that are interested in that price point, in that neighborhood, etc. So best practice would be to send out probably a postcard. You could door knock. I have door knocked and lived, so it is possible. But yeah, you want to get the message out about, hey, here was the activity. If you're thinking about selling, talk to me.
Yeah, because if I'm a seller and I'm on the fence, 42 individuals coming to see my neighbor's house, I'm pretty excited about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I may get 11, right, or whatever it is. So, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the conversation around value, right? So, in the absence of value, price becomes an issue, and with that strategy, the seller, I didn't have a commission objection up front at the table whatsoever because I was able to provide that value. And I think if you were to ask them right now, hey, they started with an off-market property with no professional representation at 167. And if we're able to close and it's a successful closing at 230, you can do the math and you can account for the commissions that we negotiated up front, and they're netting like north of $40,000 more. So the investment that they made to work with me was, in my mind, a very smart one based on what they're going to net at the end of the day. And a byproduct of that is that we earned a commission because we did what we said we were going to do, and we got them top dollar. And so if you're being strategic and intentional about getting your product ready, about setting the expectations that, hey, you need to be out of the house Thursday and Friday for these 40 showings. And we never want to overpromise and underdeliver, and yet we were future pacing them on how I predicted this to go. And most of the time, that's how it plays out.
Yeah. And I just want to pause for just a second because your grandfather was an attorney. Mm-hmm. Your dad was an attorney, yep. And your sister is, yes. Right? So growing up, you all would play court, right? Okay.
Sure,
yes?
it's in my blood.
Okay, it's in his blood. All right, so we're super happy.
But I'm not an attorney, and I cannot give legal advice.
That's exactly right. Smile. I like take a picture. So I mean, yeah, it's in your blood. That's what you grew up with, right? And so, and ironically, you're back in front of a camera and a mic, and your major in college was video production, right?
Yep.
Okay, so thanks for being in the studio today. It's a lot of fun. What I want to ask you is, you haven't always been that confident. True?
Oh yeah, true.
So for the audience who's like, oh my gosh, it's so easy for him, the way he articulates, right? Like he's not nervous about it, or whatever the story is that you're making up right now in your head. Like, walk us through kind of your journey of development from a worth standpoint.
Yeah, so we'll just go to the numbers, because I think it's important, and the kind of industry-wide, the numbers are the numbers, whether they're good or bad. And I think you just have to be at peace with what they are. And so in 2012, I made the pivot from video production professional to making real estate more of a priority. And like a lot of agents, I stumbled out of the gate those first couple years as a dual career agent. I remember kind of having to relearn the purchase agreement when I would work with a new buyer client. So it's a journey. And in 2012, I'll never forget, my 1099 from the Market Center was approximately $30,000 in gross commission income. And 10 years later, 2022, it was north of 300. So you can see that in 10 years, I went from 30 to 300 plus. And I guess my message there is that it's gradually and then suddenly. And I think a lot of times we are so hyper-focused on where we are right now, and yet if you stick with it, if you get more experience, if you have referral clients and past clients, and you build a tribe, then over time, those people, you have more people that know, like, and trust you, that want to do business with you. And I think that was just kind of a natural evolution of being in the business. Mm-hmm. So if you're a newer agent, it's going to take a little time, but if you stick with it and you work on your craft and you are intentional, and I also invested in myself, like you said earlier. I went to a program called Bold.
Yeah, we're hosting Bold, by the way, October 2024.
Yeah, so I would describe that as a Keller Williams group weekly full day program that spans about 2 months. And a part of that is mindset, language,
lead generation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Community.
Yeah, so I really adopted some of those principles, and I was intentional about how I use my words. And, clarity's power, no pressure, no diamonds. We have bold laws that, if you really think about them, are super applicable. I've also invested a lot of money in coaching.
Yeah, coaching's
I had a mastery
critical.
coach. I had some great coaches in my professional career arc. So if you want to maximize your value in your production, then there are ways for you to make those investments to help you reach your goals.
Yeah, and I would just, from again, the journey of worthiness, right? If you are having doubt in yourself, which is completely normal and human, right? That's part of what makes us a human, is be in an environment where someone believes in you more than you may currently believe in yourself. And like you said, show up. But so often I have borrowed someone's belief in me, and I extend that to other people, right? So just know that that's on, you call it a docket, but that's on the docket for yourself, is to find someone, a mentor, a friend, a coach who believes in you more than maybe you have your moments, right? So, okay, awesome. I feel like we've wrapped up maybe sellers. Comment. Okay. Do you want to reference, and I think you did, on the buyer agency contract so far?
Yeah, so I had a buyer consultation this morning, and we went over it.
Fresh.
And
Dougie Fresh had a buyer
exactly,
consultation this
absolutely.
morning, coming in hot.
So one of the key things here is, like I said earlier, the expectation is that you're agreeing on a commission up front, and then the broker, the buyer broker, I'll just read it. It says, broker shall use broker's best effort to cause the seller or seller's agent to satisfy the buyer's obligation to broker. So what I said was, I'm going to do my best to have the seller offset your financial obligation to me, and that is permissible to be a term in the purchase agreement. So in a past market, the powers that be said, hey, we don't want to see this in the purchase agreement. Toss that out the window. 180. We want it in the purchase agreement. We want to see that it's been negotiated between buyer and seller, and now it can be a term that you're going to write in further conditions that the seller is going to offer X% or flat amount to fulfill the buyer's financial obligation to their buyer broker.
All right. So luckily for you, we can just rewind and you can listen to that bit, and we'll have everything transcribed for you too, and hopefully it'll be helpful. All right.
Let me say one more thing on that. So for the agents out there, my interpretation of that is that there's going to be some more fluidity and a little more negotiation that needs to happen and conversation that needs to happen about what the net offer is and how both parties can reach a win-win given whatever the circumstances are for that particular property, for the seller's preferences, for the buyer's preferences. So I think there needs to be a spirit of compromise on how we arrive at getting clarity on what the offer is, what the net offer is, what some of the other terms are that play into it. And the cooperating compensation is just another talking point that will be included in that overall deal.
So good. So good. All right. We have a lot. So you got a buyer's agency agreement signed this morning.
Yep.
Yes. All right. So what happens if the percentage is at blank and whatever property that they want to see, that seller is not willing to compensate you at blank? What's the next form, or how do we strategize around that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of variables right now. We're not exactly sure what timelines will be or what the end result of any settlements might be. But I would say as a concept, you're going to be transparent with your buyer, and you're going to say, hey, this property, this seller is chosen to offer an amount up front. They've said, hey, bring us an offer. We'll consider whatever terms you've included. Or they can go like this and say, hey, we're not paying a dime. And so at that point, we're leaving it up to the buyer client on how they want to proceed, knowing all the information about what they're offering or lack thereof. And even if the seller initially is saying, hey, I'm not super interested in offering a cooperating compensation, that doesn't mean that you can't include that in your offer. The buyer can choose to make an offer of any kind and let the seller then make a decision based on that information versus a lack thereof before they even went on the market.
All right, so let's future pace this. I'm your buyer. I've signed a buyer's agency agreement with you, and there's a house that I found out is going on the market in Bay Hill, and I want to go see it. It's on the water, right? Super excited about it. So I text you, I call you. Let's even future pace this, even like later on this month, right? When their variables are still out there. So what happens later on this month? You look up the house, and today you can see the compensation.
Yeah, right now the cooperating compensation is readily available, and I think it's in a good spot because it does provide transparency on what the seller has chosen to lead with. And so I think each buyer's agent is going to choose how they want to conduct their business. And so, again, there are a lot of variables, so don't hold me to this if things
it's
change
mid-April.
in the future.
Right.
But essentially, if you're a qualified buyer and we've done a buyer consultation because we've agreed to work together, then we've agreed on a compensation up front between you, the buyer, and me, the buyer's agent. And I'm going to know if you're qualified enough to float 100% of that, or if we need to prioritize a property where the seller has either more willing or already said how they preferred or were offering.
Okay, let's say it's not readily available, right? Okay. I mean, let's go back to the stories, right? So there's all these what-if scenarios, and the brain does this. I mean, the brain is so powerful that it will keep coming up with these what-if scenarios, and we have to calm the brain down and focus on what we can control, right? Focus on the today. And yet that question's out there, right? So let's say the house isn't, they're like this. They don't want to pay anything. Okay. What do you say to me? What do you?
Well, so if you're a qualified.
Yes, I'm qualified.
You're a qualified buyer and we've agreed to work together.
Yes.
Then I can say, Mary, currently the seller is going like this on the cooperating compensation. So if we're unable to negotiate certain terms in the purchase agreement, if you want to make an offer on this house and you'd like me to represent you, then you'd be responsible for my commission as part of your overall offer. So you could choose to say, okay, I still want to go see the property. Let's go at least make that next step. And then if I like it and I want to write an offer, then we can figure out what terms we want to include. And that could be asking for the seller to provide that cooperating compensation to offset your financial obligation to me. Or you could choose to say, hey, I'm not going to offer as much for the house, knowing that I've also got to pay your commission. And so you and I are going to be talking about the best offer for you. And then we're also going to translate that into the purchase agreement. And then my job would be to negotiate with that list agent on how we can make it a win-win and position your offer to potentially be the best if you want to be a winning offer. If you're like, hey, gas pedal down, here's what I want this house, is different than, hey, I like it, I don't love it, if I could get it at this price, put me in with the rest of the pack, but I'm not trying to be at the top of the stack on every single thing I can. Okay,
very good. All right, let's go back, and I know we're jumping around, but there's just so many great gold nuggets that we're talking about here. I want to ask the question, again, future pace. Let's say we're in July, right? And maybe it's even sooner. What if it's not? Where can we put it?
Yeah. So
where can we put this cooperative compensation?
Right. So the guidance I'm hearing right now is that in the public remarks of your property description, I believe the seller is able to indicate if they are providing a concession.
Yes.
And then outside of that, on your own brokerage website, you can say if the seller is offering cooperating compensation in basically anywhere but your MLS.
Yep. That's it.
So I think we'll be able to find it. And again, I think each market will kind of learn how they're going to cooperate together and figure out whatever market norms are here are a little bit different than they might be in another city across the country with a different board.
Sure.
And so just like when we started to have multiple offers, we saw an evolution of the appraisal gap addendum or language that says that I don't necessarily agree with, but some agents and buyers might choose to offer a term about, hey, we're not going to ask for an inspection or repair item under a certain dollar threshold. So as the market changes, so does the way that we write and submit offers. And this is just going to be another evolution. And after a couple months, I think realtors and their individual boards will kind of figure out what language we're speaking or how to translate certain areas of these changes.
So there's in the state of Indiana, IAR has done a fantastic job. We have over 140 forms, right? And would you say on a regular basis, how many forms does someone use on a regular basis?
Yeah, so the average agent maybe is going to use 25. I know that I have a system where of those 140, I have a folder in my .loop software that's managing broker docs, and so they're all in numerical order, and they go from 1 to 75, but I don't have 1 through 75. But those are the ones that's like, oh, yep, probably need to have quick access to this. Or as I come across one, like a new one right now is no buyer representation. So that's like number 78. And the point is that I have a dedicated spot where I can go and grab a document that is more frequently used or I need to pull from. And yes, so one benefit of many from the Indiana Association of Realtors is we do have a statewide form, which isn't always the case for other states, but we have consistent paperwork that I think brings clarity to the equation.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess I was after the buyer agency agreement addendum.
Yeah, so
pretty quick. I mean, it's like 2 lines at the top.
Sure, it's really no different than the purchase agreement addendum, or if you have a listing contract and you need to make an amendment, like we have that for that contract. So it's just kind of an add-on to the fact that if you need to change your buyer agency agreement, you can do so through an amendment. I kind of think in my brain a change is an amendment, and then an addition would be an addendum. And we have both of those that
Thank you for the clarification.
Are associated with the buyer's exclusive agency contract, which is what we're calling it here in our market.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, let's go back to the purchase agreement. IAR has some great verbiage on the purchase agreement, if you want to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the concept that the Department of Justice wants us to get across is that, number one, the buyer and the buyer's agent are agreeing on compensation up front. And then, as part of your purchase agreement, of your offer, in further conditions of our purchase agreement or in an addendum, the following language may be inserted. Buyer requests seller pay buyer's monetary obligation to buyer agent in the amount of or percentage of the purchase price pursuant to the buyer's exclusive agency contract.
Pretty solid.
Yeah.
So you've got yours, which I so appreciate, in numerical order, and that's amazing. And yet there's, I would just encourage you to have things at your fingertips as well. Like if you're like me and, the brain, again, is going to spin. So we need quick resources, whether it's your contract binder to where you have like your sample agreements. And so you can reference these sample agreements that you have for certain verbiage, and you can even call it your language library, so that going forward, you can feel confident when you're, it's a Saturday night at 9:00, they want to make an offer, and you've got the resources there at your fingertips that you can access, and then it becomes a habit, right? So just make sure that you've done your due diligence.
Yeah, as an agent, I definitely have those resources readily available to me, kind of those, just like the forms that we use frequently, we want to have that associated language ready to go, so you're not trying to have to recreate that every time and time again. If you write one and it's good and you like it, save it, come back to it.
Ooh, that's a great takeaway. Awesome. Okay. All right. One other form. Broker to broker compensation. Walk us through that one, please.
Broker compensation agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a IAR form that we've had in place, and I would say that's a form that you can use to bring clarity to the equation. And really, it just says that broker A is going to pay broker B whatever you negotiate.
Pretty good.
IAR 32.
Oh, yeah. I love it. All right. Very good. What other things? Is there anything that we didn't chat about today?
Maybe just going back to the putting in the term in the purchase agreement about how the seller is going to pay the buyer's monetary obligation to buyer agent. That's the way that you can, again, honor that buyer agency agreement and ask the seller, who in this market is probably has some equity in their house. Like, we don't have a lot of distressed properties right now. So if we look at the context of the situation, the seller is the one who has the asset. The seller is also commanding some pretty competitive prices right now because we are in a low inventory environment. And so I do think that what's going to matter is the net offer. And when I mean net offer, that not only means the price, but also the terms. So are you offering possession after closing? Are you going to be aggressive on inspection? Do you have the ability to offer appraisal gap coverage if the seller is choosing to offer that cooperating compensation? So I think that's where the agent-to-agent conversation needs to happen probably more frequently and in more detail to really get to the bottom and figure out, okay, of these multiple offers, given all factors, here's who we're going to start with, and that could be in the form of a counter or an acceptance, and go from there.
All right. Awesome. Anything else?
No.
Well, I so appreciate you, Doug, not only for your energy today and your sharing, but just you answering questions so readily and being there for our agents. We really appreciate you, especially this year, right? Who knew, right? So thank you so much for joining us. Again, hopefully it's beneficial for you. We love feedback and share it with others. And have a great day. Bye.